You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Now, late this spring session, Governor Pritzker's big health insurance reform plan officially made it through the Senate, meaning it cleared its final hurdles before moving on its way to his desk. The plan touches a whole lot of different areas in the health insurance department, and here to help us break it down is the acting director of the Department of Insurance and former Illinois Senator Ann Gillespie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Cole.
So I want to start here. Like I just said, it cleared the Senate. Do you think the governor's going to sign this bill?
Oh, I have no doubt.
All right. I figured that would be the answer. But really, I want to get into the meat of just the impact this is going to have, because there's a lot of industry speak in here. There's a lot of big, broad sweeping changes, but it's tough to nail down exactly where people are going to see this the most. So if I can start with the prior authorization parts of this, really focusing on the mental health treatment in the hospital. We heard about it in the Senate too. One of the parts of this, the first 72 hours somebody goes to the hospital with a mental health emergency, health insurance companies are going to be able to cover that. Why is that a necessary thing to have in legislation for something like this?
Yeah. Mental health treatment, as you know, is very situational. It happens quickly. The need for it happens quickly, arises quickly. And so it's really important that individuals have access to care when they're having a need for it, and that they are able to have care that will allow them to be stabilized, right? And so that's why a 72-hour period without having a prior authorization for inpatient care is so critical, because that allows the patient and their physicians to get them stable and then to determine what the ongoing course of treatment will be.
Especially around mental health, why do you feel like there is that discrepancy in maybe the care that somebody needs compared to the care that they can have covered from a health insurance perspective? Is this part of the still lasting stigma around mental health, or is this part of a, maybe those conditions are a little bit harder to diagnose, or a little bit harder, that quantifies the wrong word, but I guess what do you attribute to that discrepancy?
I think you hit the nail on the head. We have a societal stigma that we're still working to overcome, and that still plays a role in how plans are designed and people's perceptions of how a mental health illness is diagnosed. And it can manifest itself in a variety of different fashions, right? And so it makes it a challenge to diagnose. There's no MRI that you can use to determine what the issue is, and so it is a more complex illness to treat. And as a result, I think everybody still struggles with exactly what's the right kind of therapy and how that should be covered.
Another part of this is banning step therapies, which would require health insurance companies to require a patient to take a cheaper treatment rather than a more expensive one, even if a doctor had prescribed it. We've heard a lot from the industry on this particular area. This is where it seems like they're talking the most about maybe rate increases or cost increases in this area. Part of the debate on the Senate floor was an acknowledgement that this could have an impact on ratepayers, but I found it interesting, you spoke about this in committee earlier this week. There may be that cost increase, but it's really going to be, you said it would be offset basically by the benefits in that way. Can you?
Well, I think it's important to note that even the industry can't determine what the cost is going to be yet. We don't know. And the industry does acknowledge or say that they use clinically accepted standards of care for all of their prior authorization step therapy utilization management decisions. So if that's true, this bill should not have a significant change, because it bases all of those utilization management tools on clinically accepted standards of care. What will be different is that instead of the patient having to go through hoops, instead of the patient and their prescriber, their doctor, having to appeal a decision that's determined by an algorithm in a claim system, having them have to go through multiple phone calls to try to get the coverage, they will get the coverage up front, and the patient will be taken out of the middle, and that's really what's key here.
The outreach of this bill, who it covers, is very interesting to me, because a lot of when we're dealing with health insurance and there's these conversations, it tends to kind of be forced into these certain areas. In the language of the bill, I believe it's private and publicly funded health insurance plans is what it's often referred to in some of these areas.
Fully funded.
Fully funded, yeah. So I wonder with that, are there limits to exactly what plans this can cover, or is this going to be much more wide-reaching than what we've seen in similar legislation attempts to regulate the health insurance industry.
The challenge is the federal government, through the ERISA Act in the 70s, exempted large groups that self-fund their plans, which are generally employers. It can be any employer over 50 employees, but it's usually larger employers with 700 employees. And so the states cannot regulate those companies. They are regulated by the federal government. So what the states are able to regulate are fully insured plans, which are ones where companies don't self-insure, Medicaid, and state employee benefits. So those are the programs that are going to be covered under this legislation.
So those large group insurance, I know there were some debates in there, that was some of the sticking points in the later stages of this, was around some of the regulations that are on those large group health insurance plans, but those won't, the bulk of it, the step therapy parts, the prior authorization parts, will not be regulated under those larger employer sections?
Well, there are many employers of 1-200 employees who do still fully insure. They don't assume the risk by self-insuring. They will be covered under this program. So it will cover any employer of any size that buys a fully insured product. It just won't cover those that choose to self-insure.
Got it. Another component of this, it was actually split into a separate bill in the Senate, but the junk insurance plan bill, we heard a lot from Republicans on the floor last night about this. And the kind of consistent message was that this was just taking an option away from consumers. And I wonder, from your perspective on this, the word kept getting tossed around in committee, deceptive. And how... Senator Severson, for example, in the committee kept wanting to, he was saying, well, if we're calling it deceptive, isn't that illegal? And why is that jump not there? Why is that connection not there between those two words when we have something like the Deceptive Practices Act in law?
Because this is a product that, by its design, is deceptive to consumers. So it's not necessarily a question of bad actors. It's a question of a product design that implies that it is comprehensive coverage, but it's not required to be, because there's no law that requires it to cover emergency room, requires it to cover maternity care. It's not subject to the ACA requirements. But it is sold as health insurance with a high deductible or something like that. And so people think they're buying a policy that is going to cover high-cost items, but in reality, it often doesn't. And one of the ways we see this is the hundreds of complaints we get from consumers who thought they'd purchased something that was going to provide coverage, and it didn't. Or you can look at the medical loss ratio. That's the metric by which you see how much a plan is spending on medical claims compared to the premium dollars they're taking in. On average, short-term limited duration plans spend about 30%. They have a medical loss ratio in the 30s. Comprehensive plans are upward of 80-85%. So that means comprehensive plans are actually paying out more on the benefits they're covering. Short-term limited plans say they're covering benefits, but they're paying out far less money on them. So that's why I use the phrase deceptive. It's deceptive by their very nature of the design of the product. And as long as that product's legal, there's very little we can do to stop the practice, because the design of the product is legal.
Why, this was asked on the floor last night as well, why ban those plans altogether rather than regulate them and bring them up to where they aren't, deceptive in the way that you're saying?
Well, we've had years of trying to regulate them. We've passed measures along the way that have given us more authority, and we continue to have the same problems. The loss ratio continues to be that low. And the thing to remember is that short-term limited duration plans were created prior to the ACA being passed. So we now have options that are available at lower cost to consumers with extended premium subsidies, enhanced premium subsidies, a variety of more comprehensive benefits that are available to consumers at costs that are similar to what the short-term limited liability plans are. So ACA has replaced the need for them to a large extent. The other thing to remember is that when a consumer applies on the ACA marketplace, They also get a determination of whether they're eligible for Medicaid coverage. A lot of folks that are buying or think they have to buy a short-term limited duration actually may be eligible for Medicaid coverage, which is even more cost-friendly to them, more or less money out of their pocket. But they will never know that unless they go to the marketplace. So it's in consumers' best interest to have them go in that direction where they will find options that are much less costly and provide more coverage.
Another huge component of this are the network adequacy parts of the bill. This has been in the spotlight for years now, really starting at least in the central Illinois area with the split between Springfield Clinic and Blue Cross Blue Shield.
Right.
The Department of Insurance fined Blue Cross Blue Shield multiple times under the Network Adequacy and Transparency Act since that split happened, but and now as the acting director of the department, what kind of tools does this give the department in order to police this problem that has been discovered to be a lot more prevalent than what maybe people thought several years ago?
Right. So we had authority over the adequacy of the network, that they had to provide an adequate network. What this does is enhance the authority and enhance the requirements for transparency. So what can often happen over the course of a policy year is a provider closes their practice to new patients, a provider breaks their not breaks their contract, but leaves the network, decides not to participate anymore. And the networks, the insurance companies don't always update that on their websites, don't provide a more current list of the providers to patients who are looking to see where they can go. So what this does is it requires them to update more frequently. It requires them to provide that information on their website. It provides them, requires that they put certain disclaimers out there. So it's really making it much more transparent to consumers, both when they're selecting a policy and when they're trying to access care.
I wonder with this, I mentioned those fines, but in the grand scheme of things, with the amount of money that these companies are often dealing with, those fines weren't the biggest. We're talking, I think it's amounted to a little bit over $1 million now over several different fines. And I'm just using Blue Cross as the one example in this because that's where we've seen the fines. But I wonder with this, a lot of what we heard in the aftermath of that controversy was that the Department of Insurance just didn't have the teeth it needed to really go after this. Does this give them that, or do more steps need to be taken for the department to go from regulation to policing?
This gives us the authority we need to do more of that, because now we have very specific requirements of what the insurance companies are required to disclose. We now are able to take action more quickly. We're able to take action proactively, and we'll be able to, as you say, police it and enforce it more.
And with your tenure at the department now starting, is that going to be a priority for you in this role? What do you, especially now after this bill is going to go into place, what do you view the Department of Insurance as really being going forward? Okay.
Well, Governor Pritzker has made it clear that he has a mission to provide more and better access to health care for Illinoisans. And so the package of reforms this year is in addition to what we started earlier in his term. Last year, for example, we passed the state-based marketplace, which enables us to provide more communication, more flexibility in the designs that are on the ACA marketplaces than what we can do today. We also passed small group rate filings, which allowed us to not cover or to deny rates that were deemed to be unreasonable. This package expands that further. So one of our priorities definitely is going to be in the Department of Insurance is to use these new tools we've been granted to further that mission of making sure Illinoisans have the best availability, they know what the availability is, they have better access to care, and we're going to be able to hold insurers accountable to delivering that.
And you're going to be the one leading that mission now. Why do you feel like what did I guess you bring to the table in that regard? What made you specifically want to get out of the Senate and go into this position and feel like you could carry that mission?
Well, one of the great things is we pass laws in the General Assembly, but the agencies implement them. So I'm so excited to be able to implement some of the laws that we pass and see it all the way through. So that's one of the attractions to moving into this role. But I come out of, before I came to the General Assembly, my entire career had been spent in managed healthcare in one way or another. And so I saw some of the things that were good that managed care does, and I saw some of the things that weren't so good that managed care does. And now in this role, I'm going to be able to use that knowledge to help ensure that consumers are protected, that we're doing the best that we can in getting them access to care, and that insurers are held accountable to what they say they're doing.
All right, well, you're excited to be implementing the laws, but I'm sure you're really feeling left out of not having to stay late for the budget passing over the next few days here.
I will not miss the all-nighters, no.
All right. Well, Acting Director of the Illinois Department of Insurance, Ann Gillespie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back.